Tom, long time no see since Thursday night. How are you today?
All right. I'm exactly the same as I was last Thursday night, but yeah, nice to see you. Nice to see you in the flesh.
And did you get lost on Thursday trying to find Glasgow? Has it been a while?
No, I didn't get lost. It's like a static car park coming through in the motorway. One day, as I said to the live audience, one day I'm going to come to Charing Cross in Glasgow and find there are no roadworks. I swear to God. I'm going to live long enough to see it.
Yeah.
Terrible.
It was unfortunate the start time, Tom, but the Mitchell Library closes at 8, so they needed to start it at 6 o'clock. It was an unfortunate time. But the audience were great. You were in good form, I might add. Jane was great. She was in good form. And it was a great wee night.
It was, and a super venue. And so we should give our thanks to the Mitchell. It's a fantastic place. What a wonderful place it is.
Yeah, I've done that, and also especially for the Madeleine Smith exhibits that they had next door. Did you get a chance to get a look at them?
I did.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting, and it just shows you what valuable artifacts lie in our museums, doesn't it? And mostly hidden from sight. It's amazing what they have, and it's just a case of people going and asking.
It's incredible when you've been speaking about the case and the intricacies of it, and it seems so distant 140 years ago, and then you see the actual letters that she wrote to her lover.
I know.
It's strangely enough, in Silverburn yesterday, I met an old colleague of mine, an old inspector of mine, and long retired, of course, and he is now the curator at the museum in Glasgow, the police museum.
How interesting. Good. They do a great job. It's super.
His name is Bob Barrowman. So if you're ever through, have you been to it?
A long time ago. Yeah, but I'd like to go again. So we must do that.
Yeah.
The next time I'm through for you buying me lunch, we can go.
I better start saving up now then.
Yes, you are. Yeah.
And you'll need to be on time that day. I bet you're on time when I'm buying.
I was. Listen, I was on time last Thursday only by the skin of my teeth, but I was on time.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was after 2 hours on the motorway.
I must admit, I was out in the foyer. It was 6:45, 15 minutes before kickoff, and I was looking at the main door out onto Berkeley Street, and I turned round, and there you were coming in the other door. I've never been pleased to see you before, but I was on Thursday.
I noticed you were pleased to see me. I was very gratified. Before this love fest continues, Simon, I've got a question. From my true crime quiz book. Okay. Now this is a gift for you. I have been feeling a bit sorry for you. You've been humiliated, but this is a gift because it's about drugs. All right? Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Which drug cartel was cocaine godmother Griselda Blanco associated with? Griselda Blanco, cocaine grandmother.
She was I've actually watched this on the telly as well. This was a Colombian drug lord called the Black Widow, wasn't she?
That's correct. Which one was it? It was the big one.
The Madeleine.
Madeleine, that's well done.
Yeah.
Well done. Listen, nice to finish a series and you getting a question right, eh?
She was the one that came over to Miami and all that. Yeah, she was some piece of work, wasn't she?
Oh, absolutely. I think she survived as well from memory. I don't think she was. I mean, most of these people got killed eventually, but I don't think she did. But anyway, you were right. Well done.
She got arrested. She got to jail.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But she was assassnated, Tom. She was shot.
Oh, was she? Was she? Was that later on then? That must have been later on.
She was shot in the head. She was pals with Escobar, so it was always going to end in tears, wasn't it?
Well,
but I watched it on Netflix. It was on Netflix, and she got killed at the end of it.
Yes, I've seen that series as well.
I think she was shot outside a butcher shop or something.
Oh, is that right? Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Anyway, easy one. Too easy.
Yeah. Well, I thought I'd give you a wee gift. Felt sorry for you.
Tom, we had Jane Hamilton there with us, which was great. It's always nice to have her there with us. She gives that different aspect, being a crime reporter all those years, etc. Yeah. It's interesting how she sees things through a slightly different lens, and that's the whole idea, I suppose. You mentioned there that a final episode. Well, not quite a final episode. I think we've got one more when we're going to summarise the season so far, season 3. And today we're going to discuss the deep dive team's work during the week, but that'll be the last of those, if you like, because they've already finished up. They're on their holidays, and then we're going to have a season end, and then we're going to have a chat and disclose some of what's coming in the new season, including the Manson murders and some big cases like that too.
Yeah.
So we're going to get a wee break. I know you're going to be busy. You've got your book launch and you've got a lot of lectures coming up, haven't you?
I have. I've got a lot of events coming up, and of course you're going to be busy because you're going to get a new leg. You're going to get a wooden leg.
That's well, I'm getting a new knee, a wooden leg. You're so dramatic.
Well, they'll probably just put when they probably see your leg, they'll probably say, well, let's just do the job when he's under. You
might just put me down.
No, I know. Well, that's possible, but no, I think you'll end up with a nice shiny wooden leg, and they'll say it was too far going. Sorry, Simon, but once we got in there, we thought we better do the job properly. And the good news is, you can throw away these toe clippers. You wouldn't need them anymore.
I'll still have another leg. Tom, you would miss me so much because who would you have to make you look good?
Good point. We wish you well.
Thank you. What I was going to say, having Jane there, one of the cases we covered on Thursday is our first case this week, the case of Mary McLaughlin. The woman in Partick, big part of the community down there in Partick in Glasgow, not far from where we were the other night at the Mitchell. And she was murdered in 1984, September 1984. There was nobody caught at the time. I was involved in the investigation, the murder investigation, and it went on, and we just got nowhere. We just couldn't get any traction in it at all. We had a few suspects over the piece, as you always do with family and whatnot, but the whole drive of the inquiry is to eliminate people. That's how we work it, is we get people in the frame and then try and eliminate them. And that's what kept happening. And lo and behold, it was solved as a cold case.
That's right. We talked about this during the live event, and of course our listeners will be hearing about the live event, so we don't want to duplicate too much, but just to say that the Mary McLaughlin case is a very good example of a cold case and of a structured cold case review. And not to repeat myself too much, what happened when Police Scotland were formed, they ordered a forensic review of all unsolved cases, and that included Mary McLaughlin's. And garments from that case, which had been carefully taken and carefully stored, and you know, I keep banging on about this, but all these wonderful historic cases being solved always depend on good work having been done at the time. So the 1984 team did a good job in retaining the evidence in a proper fashion. And of course, later on in 2014, that gave up its secrets. And interesting for me, the reason I was interested in the Mary McLaughlin case particularly was because the techniques they used to extract low copy number DNA from the ligatures was identical to that had been developed during the World's End case, which I was involved in, and of course I've written about the World's End murders. So it's an interesting case because, as I was trying to explain to the audience at the Mitchell Library, this low copy DNA procedure, which was piloted really, and which was, really introduced during the World's End case, one case on its own doesn't really mean that much, but if you get that same technique used again successfully, as it was in the Mary McLaughlin case, then that's another matter altogether. And so we see this new element of forensic science and forensic recovery, which has been developed in these two cases, and justice at last for poor Mary, who sounds like a nice lady just going about her business, trying to lead her life, and who was brutally murdered. So it was a great result, and but the audience, our listeners, will hear a lot more of that, talk of that, and the techniques used for that in our live broadcast. And I thought I'd bring a prop along, Simon, and of course, as usual, I've got an ulterior motive because I was going to fake strangle you, but then perhaps just a slip of the wrist, and and maybe save you the pain of having your knee done. I was thinking along these lines.
Well, this is where listening to the live podcast isn't going to do it for the audience, because there is that bit where you stood up, and it was good. It was good that you brought it through. It reminded me of an old procurator fiscal that I used to have, Caroline McNaughton, that we worked with. And whenever she had a jury, everything became 10 times more dramatic, because that was her forte, really.
That's right.
And she always insisted on the productions being there. Simon, have you got the knife? Have you got the knife? Right. Oh, unseal the bag. You can sign this and do that. She wanted to take the knife out the bag in front of the jury and hand it to them and let them feel it. So you did a wee bit of that on Thursday. Yeah. It's the benefit of coming to our live shows, Tom, is there's a different dynamic to it entirely. Right. And people can see, like the Madeleine Smith exhibits that we had in the library. These things, for true crime enthusiasts, these things are great, that they can actually see demonstrated what it is that we're talking about. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about with that was to clarify for our listeners a wee bit, because again it might be skipped over slightly on the live recording, was the Homicide Governance Review Team, because this is a Police Scotland initiative that's been very successful, and I thought you might let the audience know a wee bit about that.
Yeah. One of the problems in the past was that cold cases tended just to lie and lie and lie. And of course, the longer you leave a case, the harder it is to warm it up. And one of my sayings always with cold cases, the best way to solve a cold case is to keep it warm. And that's exactly what the Homicide Governance Review Board do. What they do, having learned the lesson from our generation, what they do is they review every month. They have a meeting. There's the head of forensic science. There's an assistant chief constable or a detective chief superintendent. There's a member of the Crown Office, an advocate deputy. And they sit with their staff, they sit round and they review all of the old cases across the board. And they ask the same question. Is there anything new? Is there any new evidence? Is there any new developments? Are there any new forensic techniques which we could apply to this case and this evidence now that we haven't before? Yeah? And they've been hugely successful. I mean, the McRae case, the case of Rennie McRae, who was killed up in Inverness, they brought that man to justice. They had a suspect for all those years, but it took 45 years. They built a case because of new forensic science techniques and new investigative techniques. They brought a case to court, and the man was found guilty. So that's just one example, but there's any number. And Mary McLaughlin was one of them, of course. Mary McLaughlin was one of these cases where that had been reviewed and where the evidence had been examined under the new light of forensic science. So that's what the Homicide Review Board do, and it's a fantastic system, and it should mean that cold cases are constantly being monitored.
Yep. The thing I should finish that off with, Tom, is that on Thursday I was promoting the live podcast there. It might seem silly when it's already past, but we've got another one a week on Thursday, the 27th, in the West End of Glasgow at the Sea Cross. So I just wanted to remind the audience that there's still a few spaces available up there at the Sea Cross if they want to come along. It's free, and we'll both be there. I'm not sure, is Jane going to manage through that night?
She certainly is. She's looking forward to it.
Good.
Yeah.
So we've got the full squad. Our books will be there, special offers on the books, etc. So that'll be another good night. We should start getting the hang of it soon. Tom, our second case the deep dive team picked this week was the Cumbria shootings, which I remember very, very well, and I'm sure you do. Yeah. The Derek Bird rampage through Cumbria, which was very strange because nobody ever really thought what the motive might have been for it, because up until then I don't think there had been many clues that this was going to happen. But up that 15 miles of coastline, a beautiful part of the country, by the way. Part of the problem here was that the police response. It seems that it came out initially that it was a guy with an air rifle going about shooting at people, and that would negate the response that was required, because we would respond entirely differently to that message, wouldn't we?
That's right, but and you must remember too that the real learning point about the Derek Bird case was the availability and the number of armed response vehicles there were, particularly in
Yeah.
rural areas. And after the Bird case, there was a complete review done of our armed response capability. And I remember it very well because we had an armed response capability, of course we did, but
Yeah.
we enhanced it considerably because of the learning from the Bird case. But in rural areas, it's going to take some time to respond. And the trouble is that someone like Derek Bird can do the most enormous damage with a firearm in a very, very short time before an
Yeah.
armed response vehicle attends who are properly equipped to resolve the situation. It reminded me a bit, this case, of the Rowell Moat case. Do you remember the Rowell
Yes,
Moat
that's
case?
what I thought of as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where the officer was, where a police officer was shot.
Yeah.
And it was the same part of the world. It was Newcastle area. He went on the rampage. He didn't kill himself. He actually was shot by the police at the end of the day. But it was a very similar thing, something that got completely out of control. It just burst upon us as extreme violence. But the learning from Derek Bird was about the availability and the cover and the overlap of armed response, which of course is now an integral part of the police service throughout the UK.
Was there a public inquiry, Tom? Is that where that came
There
from?
was an inquiry. I don't know I can't remember if it was a public inquiry, but I think there was a fatal accident inquiry. But
Right.
there was certainly recommendations. I think it was a judge-led inquiry. There were certainly recommendations came from the Bird case, and that changed and upped our armed response across the UK.
There was a couple of things I was going to ask you about specifically. I'll do that in a minute or two. Firstly, I wanted to mention some of the victims. The first one was in the woods. The mother was shot in front of her two kids that were strapped in the car. And it seems that after that happened, and we'll never know why that happened, he'd lost all reason then, and it became totally random.
That's right, the random shooter wandering about. And of course, it's a nightmare because if it's somebody who knows the countryside and somebody who's out in a rural environment, they can lie low in a woodland or behind a hedge for an hour and then pop up again. If they're on foot across fields and in woods, very, very difficult to track these people, very, very difficult to contain these folk. And of course, anybody they come across on their travels turns into the next victim.
Yeah,
So it's very, very difficult to do. I have to say, it's very difficult to do even if you do have extensive armed response cover. The one thing, of course, this is an area where it's been considerably assisted by the developments in drone technology, because our armed response vehicles now carry drones. So if they know somebody's wandering about in a wooded area, they can actually put up a drone to have a look and see what they can see. And they actually have a capability too of drones which have heat sensors. So even if it's at night and somebody's lying low, they can pick up the heat spot of somebody hiding in a woodland. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's a wee mini helicopter then. It's like a wee mini police helicopter that can obviously go lower and go to places that the helicopter couldn't go.
Well, exactly. And they're very cheap, and you can keep them in what it's equivalent of a mini suitcase in the back of the police car. And as long as you've got an operator who is skilled in its use, and it's a considerable skill, they can do wonderful things. And
they're probably going to replace beatmen soon.
I think they'll replace a lot of things. I think, from what they're saying, you'll be able to get a delivery of groceries.
Your medicine, yeah, all sorts
which,
of things.
which reminds me, that's a sort of parallel story here. I was reading quite recently about Douglas Bader, the great fighter pilot who had a wooden leg, had two artificial legs. And of course, when he got shot down, one of his artificial legs was trapped in the hurricane he bailed out of. And so the RAF came across and dropped a new wooden leg to him when he was a prisoner of war. That just reminded me to say, I hope that your knee transplant goes very well, Simon.
You've been very encouraging.
Of the many skills I have, I actually have an O level in woodwork. Yeah, an O level in woodwork, and I think I could carve a wooden leg for you. In fact, I would consider it an honour to be asked to do so.
Well, you've probably not whittled anything for 60 years, so you're not getting anywhere near them. I wouldn't like. I'd rather let the grandkids make one.
I think that's very wise. Very wise.
Tom, to round off the Cumbria shootings there was 12 killed,
Yeah.
then himself, and 11 injured, which tells you a lot, because generally in these kinds of incidents, massacres and these kind of things that we speak about regularly here in Crime Time, you get maybe double, treble the injuries that you get fatalities, because that's the nature of these things. He's not as successful most of the time. But not the case here. He was ruthless, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I wanted to ask you about for our audience was that he had cut the shotgun, he had cut the length of the shotgun, what we would have called a sawn-off shotgun back in the day when bank robberies were rife and all the rest of it. I know that you've got a great interest and knowledge of firearms. Can you explain to the Crime Time audience what effect sawing off the shotgun would have?
Yes, I mean, at the end of a shotgun, a normal shotgun barrel, there are things called chokes, which are the end of the barrel is crimped so that the shot doesn't spread too widely. Now, what you do by sawing off a shotgun barrel, you actually remove that choking, and so you get a much wider spread. You get what you call really a scatter gun. So instead, I mean, if I was shooting a shotgun at a target 20 yards away, I would expect all the pellets to concentrate in an area of about 8 or 9 inches. If you saw it off, that would be double that and even more. So it's for widespread shot. Now, the thing about that is, of course, and this is where all the injuries come in, these injuries are not necessarily going to be fatal injuries because it's a widespread pellet rather than a concentration of pellets. But that's what it does. It scatters the shot over a shorter distance.
Always remember an ID parade we had, Tom, after a bank robbery on Paisley Road, I think. I don't know if this will come across in the podcast to describe it, but the ID parade, as you know, we had stand-ins. We had our suspect there and we had our stand-ins. So they're all behind the screen in this occasion. At Pollock, we had the ID parade room where it was all set up for this purpose. And the witness came in, and he had been on a bridge where the robbers had ran over the bridge, quite a common thing to get away from the police, and then they get into their vehicle and away. And as they were running across the bridge, our witness had been on the bridge, and one of them, who appeared to be the leader, certainly carrying the shotgun, pushed him out of the way and shouted at him to get out of the way and called him names. So when the witness came into the parade room, he had his fingers up over his eyes, trying to keek through his fingers, because he didn't realise that they couldn't see him through the screen. So the officer running the parade put him at his ease and said to him, as you do, just read the script to him, have a look at the lineup in front of you and take your time. If there's anything you want them to do, if you want them to speak, to talk, to shout, whatever, just say. And what you do, of course, is you get them all to say it or all to do it. And what happened, Tom, was that when the witness said, could I have them say this and point a gun at me, then the officer in charge obviously asked them all to do exactly the same thing on the count of 3. And on 1, 2, 3, they all pointed a gun and said whatever it was the guy had said to him crossing the bridge. The only problem was that they all pointed a gun as if they were pointing a handgun at head height. And one of them, who turned out to be the accused, pointed from the waist as if he was holding a sawn-off shotgun. So there was a wee clue there when they were told to point a gun. And guess what? He was convicted.
Having given you that assistance, I would have hoped so.
So that's another case of true crime being stranger than fiction.
Absolutely.
There's another whole episode we could do about ID parades, Tom. I'm sure you get lots of stories about them. And it's something that the public are interested in, because they can find themselves on an ID parade through no fault of their own if they happen to witness something that happens on the street or whatever.
Well, of course, ID parades are now largely superseded by digital imaging. So I don't imagine there are any physical ID parades anymore.
How many Sunday mornings did you spend running about the streets trying to find stand-ins?
Oh, well, we were very lucky because we had We had the grass, depending on who the suspects, we had the grass market hostels where we had a lot of folk, sort of almost vagrants. And if it was younger people, it was the Students' Union. The price of a couple of pints and they would do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a £5. I can remember.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. But
you'll remember when it was 3 and 6, of course.
the funny thing is, I remember it was a florin. But the funny thing was, you always got the same question. You stand in. What happens if I get picked out? Yeah.
Tom, it was after this next one that the deep dive team called me your young prodigy. So I thought that was... I think they're getting the hang of this now. They've obviously noticed a difference in our outlooks, and they think there's a generation gap there.
Yeah. Maybe.
The two next cases were Hungerford cases, strangely enough. It's a few years between them. The first one in 1876, when the Florins would have been about, the 11th of December 1876. And this was quite an unusual one for crime time. We've not covered this before, I don't think. It was poachers. But what we have covered, unfortunately, is the murder of police officers and the two cops, the inspector and the cop, William Gray and William Turlibody, that were murdered that night by the poachers. People maybe think poaching and switch off because they think that's so much a rural thing. I think what people don't realise, Tom, and I'll ask you about it as far as Lothian and Borders concerned, because Strathclyde was mostly rural. People think of Glasgow and they think of the bigger towns like Dumbarton, Paisley. They don't realise that the bulk geographically of our police coverage is rural. Yeah. And it'll be the same in L&B, wouldn't it?
Very much so. But this episode really tickled my fancy because, of course, it goes right back to the history of policing, and particularly county policing, because poaching is really not a big issue now. Because if you think about it, nobody wants pheasants now or rabbits, and the price of venison is so low that it's not worth people. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Of course it happens, but it doesn't happen on the grand scale or the organised scale that it once did. But back in 1876, poaching was a very serious problem, particularly for the country gentlemen and the landed set who were very, very powerful, particularly out with the cities. And if you look at the way that chief constables were appointed in the county areas, they were often appointed at the behest of the local squirearchy. One of their major jobs was the suppression of poaching. And violent poaching was a huge problem, to such an extent that if you were found at night with your face blackened, that was an offence in itself. If your face and your hands were blackened, i.e. if you were going out at night to conceal yourself, then that was an arrestable offence. And there were many such violent incidents like this, not quite as bad as this, because there wasn't many police officers murdered, but there was a lot of violent incidents where gamekeepers and poachers fought pitched battles, sometimes with shotguns and sometimes more physically with sticks and axes and stuff like that. It was a very serious issue in the county areas because, of course, there was such great poverty. And people were going out to poach deer, pheasants, rabbits, to feed themselves and to sell the surplus to make some money. So it was a big, big problem. And I'd read quite a lot about it when I was reading about the history of policing, particularly in the county areas. You'll always see references to poaching and to night poaching and to armed poaching. And it was one thing to go and take a fish from the river or catch a pheasant to eat. There was a general view that, well, that was just one of these things. But quite a lot of the people who went out, they were armed gangs and they were going to poach considerable numbers of wildlife so they could sell them. And of course, a lot of these country gentlemen, they ran their sporting estates so that they could rent out the shooting and use it for themselves. So they were very, very hard on poaching. And we often talk about, there's not much new in policing as well as drugs and cybercrime, But there are some things which were very, very important 100 years ago, which have just faded away, and poaching is one of them.
Tom, I remember explosives being used to fish rivers and things, to stun the fish, and they would float to the surface, and then they would scoop them up. But as you say, it was kind of marginalised then, and it was for profit. What we're talking about in this case was people hunting their dinner, basically. Before we go back to the case, I think we should touch on the fact that poaching nowadays is major big business, organised crime and all the rest of it, but it's more to do with animals, elephants, rhinos, tigers, big cats, that kind of thing that we don't really see in this country for obvious reasons. But it's still a huge problem for the environment and for the future of the planet in a lot of these species in places like Africa, South Africa, Kenya, etc., and of course all across the world.
You're quite right. I was talking about the UK, but I should have remembered that some of our audience are not listening from the UK. And of course, in many places, poaching is still a big issue, particularly it's not just for what they call bush meat either. It's for trophies. And I mean, there's some species of rhinoceros that have been completely hunted to extinction for their horns, and pangolins and things like that, poor little innocent, quiet creatures, because of the Chinese medical market, who think these things are either, aphrodisiacs or some cure-all, rhino horn, pangolin scales and stuff like that. So yes, I didn't mean to dismiss it the way I perhaps have. Internationally, it's still a huge issue.
Yeah, and I dare say there's people still starving in the world, although we don't have that specific problem. There's maybe countries where that kind of thing still goes on. It's maybe worth an episode in its own in the future. We can get a bit more, maybe get a guest in that specialises in that kind of thing, because it's a huge issue for us all.
Yeah.
And I know that probably you're pally with David Attenborough because you maybe went to school together. I don't know. You'd be about the same age. No comment.
Mine is just going to have a leg off. I would remind you, but both my legs are still here, functioning well.
We should finish the case off, really, the two policemen that were murdered. It was a really strange story with the family, wasn't it, how it all panned out? And the two that were arrested weren't the two that were hung at the end of the day. And the interesting part was they were hung 3 months after the event. So it's not like you get death row now where people are on death row for 20 and 30 years. 3 months after the event, somebody was getting hung, and it was two of the brothers that went to the gallows.
Yes, I mean, and this was very, very clearly, 2 police officers had been killed, and somebody had to pay the price. That was what it was all about. And there had to be an example made, and somebody had to pay the price, and.
Yep. And just for the record, if anybody hasn't heard that episode, it's an interesting episode. It's quite detailed. But it was 2 pheasants and a jay. That's what they had. And that's what they stole.
And a jay, by the way, there's not many of them around on our part of the world, but you see a lot of them in Scottish borders. And it's a member of the crow family. And so it's absolutely no good to eat. The only thing a jay has going for it is its flamboyant feathers, which they use for fishing flies. So that would be the reason they shot the jay. But,
right. And there was a ballad came of it. You don't happen to know it, do you?
No, I don't know the ballad, but I'm going to search it out, and I'll send you a copy when you're convalescing.
That'll really cheer me up. I'll need the drugs. I'll need those drugs they're going to give me.
Yeah.
Tom, our 4th case, well, let's have a wee advert there. Our 4th case this week from our deep dive team, again, was Hungerford, but this time 1987, so more than 100 years forward in time. But most people remember, of a certain age, will certainly remember this because it was a big, big case in its day, 1987. Michael Ryan, when he killed 16 people and himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, this was big impact, Tom, wasn't it? You said that the previous case with Bird had a major influence on the availability of weapons and types of weapons. And this too had a big impact. And then when you think forward that Dunblane wasn't that long after this, really that's why our firearms laws are the way they are today.
Yeah, the Bird case, which we discussed, brought in armed response vehicles. The Ryan case brought in a ban on semi-automatic weapons.
Right.
So after that, you couldn't have a semi-automatic large caliber rifle. So you can still have a .22 semi-automatic rifle, but nothing above that. And they all had to be surrendered. And I remember members of my family were involved in farming, and quite a number of them had weapons like that and had to surrender them. So Michael Ryan brought about that. And then, of course, later on, Dunblane meant that there were no handguns at all. So these three cases,
Right.
taken as a whole, you're quite right, had a profound influence on the whole business of firearms control and firearms availability in the UK.
Yep. This guy, Michael Ryan, 27 years of age, killed his own mother to start us off with.
Yeah.
And again, this randomness, he just lost it completely.
Yes.
The dog walker, the taxi driver, major questions, obviously. I was interested when the deep dive team said this raised some issues about his mental health. You're damn right it did.
Yeah.
A traffic cop, Roger Bertrand, as well.
Yeah.
And he went to his old school and barricaded around himself, and that's where it all came to an end when he committed suicide in the school. So the guy had real problems, didn't he? And it's all about the availability of the firearms, Tom, and the reaction of the police. So that's how we've evolved to where we are today.
Yeah, and you've got to say, right, Michael Ryan, obviously unhinged, wanted to take revenge on the world, murdered his mother from the outset. So psychologically, you could say this was always going to end badly. It was always going to be a homicide-suicide situation.
Yeah.
But what a semi-automatic, full-caliber rifle, large-caliber rifle meant was that the damage was greater, a lot greater. Now, he could have killed people with an axe or a knife or a spear or any other weapon, really, but, of course, a firearm, it makes it all that much more deadly. And, of course, a rifle firearm, with a large caliber bullet, means he can kill much more easily from a distance. He doesn't have to get up close and personal. So, yeah.
I'm going to go off piste a wee bit here, Tom, because it's something that was in the news this weekend. In fact, I think it was this morning that there was another 17-year-old killed, or there was another killing with a knife. I'm not sure where it was, I just heard it. But it had me thinking this morning about offensive weapons. That's not a term that I can remember us using on the podcast here. But of course, offensive weapons were always a big part of police work on our streets, and especially people going into clubs and pubs and whatnot. It was always a concern about offensive weapons. And I've just got a feeling that since my day, certainly on the streets back in the 80s, early 80s, that in those days less people carried weapons. It was a big thing if somebody had a blade, a knife or whatever, and the courts dealt with it accordingly. It seems to be almost commonplace now with the amount of serious crime that we have, because people are.
I'm not sure about that, Simon. I think, like most of these things, it comes and goes. But I mean, the truth is that there were a lot more stabbings and slashings and uses of knives in the 1970s than there are now. I don't think we do ourselves any good by publicising some of these cases. And I know there's freedom of the press, etc. But what you're doing is if you publicise it, a 17-year-old boy got stabbed in the west of Edinburgh, then quite a few 17-year-old boys in the west of Edinburgh will think, oh, I'm in danger. I'd better carry a knife for my own defence. And this is time and time again you see this. Time and time again you see this.
So it's self-perpetuating.
Yeah, dear, it is. When I was a detective sergeant, we ran a stabbing shift. We had a stabbing patrol of a sergeant and 2 detective constables who worked cover shift Friday, Saturday and Sunday night in the city centre of Edinburgh because there were so many stabbings. And I dealt with a lot of stabbings. And I can't tell you how often I've gone down to a house to speak to parents because their son's either been stabbed or has stabbed somebody else and heard the same story. Oh yeah, he was terrified of being attacked, so he carried the knife for his own defence, and he ends up getting stabbed by the knife he was carrying for his own defence. So I think it's a cyclical thing, and I think we should be very, very careful about how we handle this, because we can make matters worse. We can make matters worse by encouraging a moral panic around about this. because you'll actually find in many cases that these weapons are being carried in particular locations by particular people. And I mean, many years later, when I was a detective superintendent, we were looking at what's due, and we said, well, people who carry offensive weapons tend to do that as a habit. So who in our area has been convicted under the Prevention of Crimes Act 1953, Section 1, carrying an offensive weapon? Who's been convicted? Let's check up and see where they are and what they're doing. And it was actually quite surprising how many of them still had the habit of carrying offensive weapons.
Yeah. It's a cultural thing and geographic thing as well, certain areas.
And it's a fashion thing, Simon. It's a fashion thing. That's what it is.
Well, that's not really my strong point, but I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know it's not, but just you wait to get that leg painted. Be good. Be impressive.
So the shooting that we're talking about there, the Hungerford Massacre, as it was known at the time, it was nationwide, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Oh yes, it brought about national reviews. And of course, it put tremendous curb on firearms. And of course, the pattern of firearms used in crime has now changed very much.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that all the curbs are on the legal owners of firearms. And I noticed there was a piece in the paper saying that there was a huge increase in firearm certificate charges. And yet very few guns used in crime have actually been stolen from farmhouses and things now, because security now is so good.
Yeah.
Most of them have either come in from Eastern Europe or, and this is the disturbing thing, are replicas which have been adapted for use. And there was an interesting case about 18 months ago where there was actually quite a major exercise, a good exercise done by Police Scotland, and somebody through in your neck of the woods was arrested and charged with having converted quite a number of weapons from being replicas to real use. And these guns are dangerous for everybody because the metal that they're made from is not metal of the standard of a firearm. And so they only fire 2 shots and then they blow up in your hand.
Right. Interesting, Tom.
They used to be called one-shot wonders. I got myself involved in the whole ballistics thing for a case I was involved in, which I'll talk about another time. But you can actually tell if you can recover the bullet, whether it's been fired from one of these one-shot wonders or not. Because, of course, the one-shot wonders have had their barrels bored out, but they're smooth bore, and therefore they do not have the rifling. And so they're not as accurate, but they're just as deadly at a very short distance for 1 or 2 shots. But if you fire more than a couple of nitro cartridges, and that's what is the propellant in most modern bullets now, most modern rounds, then the damn thing either cracks and breaks open and falls apart or blows up in your hand and you end up, So if you're in the hospital getting your leg off, Simon, have a look round the ward. Was anybody sitting there with one hand? Then, Simon,
you know what happened.
Make some investigation, sir. Get your notebook out and make some investigation.
It used to be a thing, Tom, that robbers and criminals used imitation firearms.
Yeah.
They were quite a thing at the time.
Right.
More people had them than had actual firearms.
Of course, yeah.
And I always remember a high court case that I was at, and I had given my evidence. I was in the body of the court, and an old colleague of mine, an inspector, was in the box, and the solicitor made the mistake of saying to him, "Officer, it was only an imitation firearm. Let's clarify that for the jury." And the inspector said, "Well, when you've got an imitation firearm pointing at your face, you've no way of knowing what it is. It's exactly the same as a real firearm." And the jury all had a titter at that. It was fantastic.
Yeah,
a real fupa. Yeah. Because somebody's pointing an imitation firearm at you. You just do what you're told, don't you? On the off chance.
That's right. You're not quite sure.
So that was the Hungerford Massacre, Tom. He killed himself, thankfully. Saved us a lot of trouble. Saved us a bullet. Our fifth case this week, Tom, very interesting one. And you said one earlier got you thinking about Moat in that case down in the northeast. Fatty Arbuckle. And this got me thinking about Michael Barrymore.
Yeah.
Because this case had the same effect on Fatty's career.
Yeah. And there have been so many since, haven't there, in Hollywood? And of course, back in the days of the silent movies, and that's where Fatty Arbuckle really was, you know. You could live a secret life. Now you can't. You can't. Nothing's secret now. But Fatty Arbuckle was one of the first persons who was convicted in the court of public opinion. And it was trial by media. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I saw the 20s and the hotel they were in, the party, the booze, what our deep dive team said was boozing, skinny dipping, all these things they were doing. And I thought, wait a minute, that was prohibition.
Well, that's right. But of course, prohibition actually encouraged that. And
behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I have to say, the party sounded all right to me. I mean,
for sure. The St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Fatty Arbuckle. Do you know any of his stuff, Tom? Have you ever seen any of his
No. He was.
My
mother used to talk about Fatty. He was a sort of comic character. It was a bit like Stan Laurel, not Laurel, Oliver Hardy. You know, he was a big, heavy guy, but he was very much a sort of clown type comedy character in the silent movie era. That's who Fatty Arbuckle was. But and I suppose the image he had was not like Errol Flynn or these people who had a sort of a bit of daring about them. And you wouldn't be surprised if Errol Flynn had been involved in an orgy, because he kind of looked like that, you know. But Fatty Arbuckle had that sort of innocent, almost childish look about him. And so even more horrific when you discovered that all was not as it seemed. But I think the key to this whole thing is the difference between the image and the reality. His goody image went against him. People will forgive a rogue or understand a rogue. We're seeing that just now in the world of international politics. We're seeing people who have fairly dubious characters, but people have priced that in and said, yeah, well, we know he's a bit of a rogue, but we like this and that. Uh-huh. The thing about Fatty Arbuckle was his image was so goody-goody, so clean, that when he did fall from grace, the fall was even faster and further.
There's no better example of that than the current president of the United States, really, is there? People obviously know that he's convicted now as well, that he's got these flaws of character and misogyny and stuff like that he comes out with. But on balance, they give him the benefit of the doubt. He's a bit of a liability. He's certainly not a safe pair of hands, that's for sure. But he gets away with it because of his image that he's created.
Well, that's right. And then people forgive him because he's a disruptor. He's an outsider. Mm-hmm. He's something a little bit different. He talks their language. And I mean, I remember when he was convicted for paying hush money to a busty exotic dancer that he'd had sex with to keep her quiet. I remember speaking to some people and they said, well,
what's the problem?
What else would you do? What else would you do? and quite a lot of his other, I've got American relatives, and what they said was it was a huge mistake to charge him with that, because his base supporters would say, oldish man having a fling with a voluptuous young, good on you, Donald. Go yourself, yes. You know. It's so,
He goes up in their estimation.
Well, exactly, yeah. And all of that was priced in. Yes, we know about his flaws. You could say the same. I mean, not to the same degree, but you could say the same about our own ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson. People priced in said, yes, we know can be a buffoon, and he's a rascal, and he's got all these illegitimate children, and he treats his wives and girlfriends very badly. However, you know, he's a big, larger than life character, and he's not a grey nondescript person, and we like him, you know. But the thing about Fatty Arbuckle, of course, was that he was flying under false flags, and the public don't like that.
Mm-hmm. One thing that came out of it was, Tom, people maybe wonder about this. Jane Hamilton, interestingly, our reporter friend, crime reporter, explained it to a live audience a bit on Thursday, or referred to it, certainly, about the restrictions that are on the press once someone is charged with a crime.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's commonly appreciated, that once someone has been charged, the police can't speak to him anymore. He's now under representation. The court procedure kicks in, and then there are big restrictions on the press, and it's why we hear nothing. We sometimes hear Joe Bloggs, age such and such from Edinburgh, has been charged with murder or whatever it might be, and that's the last we hear of it for 3 months or more until it comes to court.
You don't even get a name, Simon. What you hear is a 63-year-old man
That's right.
appeared from custody today, charged with the murder of a 48-year-old woman, that sort of thing. And that's all to do with the Lord Advocate's guidelines, which in England are enshrined in the Contempt of Court Act. And of course, this puts proper journalists at a tremendous disadvantage, because misinformation can run riot on the internet, and nobody can correct it. And of course, we've seen this recently with the riots down south, where there was very clearly, deliberately misinformation put out there, and the authorities could not correct it for fear of the Contempt of Court Act. And I really think we've got to think about that. We've got to be much faster on our feet. And I don't think the authorities did a good job there. They could have put out a lot more in the way of guidance to formal news media outlets, so that they could have corrected that and perhaps stopped that kind of misunderstanding and these rumours running riot.
Yes. Yeah. It was interesting to hear Jane confess on Thursday as well that she's been charged with contempt. But we'll leave it like that, because you'll need to listen to the whole thing to hear the result of it.
Well, I know half a dozen very, very good, experienced journalists and editors, and they've all been at one point in time charged with contempt. It is an occupational hazard. If you're doing your job and you're on the edge of these things, then it's a bit like the police. I mean, I have to say it. If it's about having complaints made about you, you know, if you're doing your job, it'll happen. It will happen.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I was put on the beat to stop it happening. I was put in uniform to stop it happening.
What, stop it happening to you?
Yes.
Did it work?
Yes. Yeah, if you're not active, if you're not kicking doors in and catching drug dealers or whatever it is your line of work is, then if you stop doing that, then the complaints dwindle. It's amazing. Oh, dear. And also the involvement of the fiscal and the press and the public and all the rest of it. Everything's escalated the more active you are, Tom. You know that.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
And the more chances to make mistakes as well, because you're dealing with productions, you're dealing with court, you're appealing court all the time, and everything's escalated. The best thing you do is just go walk the beat and don't see anything.
Yeah, well, that didn't get you very far, but I know what you mean. You've got to be really, really careful. But yes, I mean,
we spoke about procedure here quite regularly, and just in the last few weeks we spoke about the verdicts in Scottish courts, the not proven, etc., that people can listen to. But with this Fatty Arbuckle, just to finish it on it, what a joke. 2 mistrials and then an acquittal. How on earth can somebody go to trial 3 times for the same thing?
We've spoken about double jeopardy over here, and have said that, you know, in cases of murder and things, double jeopardy is a bad idea, and there's now the double jeopardy where somebody can be retried twice. Angus Sinclair was eventually tried twice. But I've got to say, this is the other side of the coin, where if you don't have some sort of protection against that, you get people just coming back time and time and time again. And of course, that is originally why the double jeopardy rule about not being able to be tried twice for the same crime, that's why it was introduced, because of the kind of abuse that came about as a consequence that we've seen in the Fatty Arbuckle trial.
I'm not sure if it's still the same in the States, but they had this mistrial that the defence could go for, and that meant everybody had to reconvene again, didn't it?
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. And sometimes it went on forever. And it must have been very, very difficult because, of course, witnesses, they're what they're called, what they remembered. And, of course, some people played it on and on and on in the hope that something would change. A vital witness would die. A vital witness would move away or lose interest or be intimidated or be bought off.
Yes.
This was often the case with organised crime. Yeah.
Yeah. Good, Tom. Thank you. So our last case this week, we're back to Assassination at JFK. And this was the behind the scenes, if you like. This was the follow-on from that, because we all know that Oswald was the guy that killed JFK, and then he was killed, I think, 48 hours later. And this was Jack Ruby. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of this at the time, Tom? Was this part of your consciousness?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is added to all the conspiracy theories round about the John Kennedy assassination, because there's this theory that there was something wrong with this, that Oswald was a patsy, that he was being silenced, and that Jack Ruby was a vehicle of organised crime, etc., etc. It was all part of the conspiracy thing. The truth of the matter is that Ruby was a fantasist, he was a police groupie, but when you read more deeply into Jack Ruby's nightclubs, there were drinking dens, some of which were, shame to say, were frequented by members of the Dallas Police Department. Heaven forswear. Exactly. But Ruby was always seeking validation and profile. He always wanted to be somebody. He wanted to be somebody, as the famous line goes. He wanted to be somebody. And he was one of these guys who was always trying to please, always trying to raise his status. And of course, when Kennedy was killed, John Kennedy was his absolute political idol. And he was devastated by this. So thought that he would claim a significant walk-on part in this whole disaster. But I mean, when you look at it, and you can still see the film of the whole thing, and the Dallas police officers walking Lee Harvey Oswald out into an unrestricted public area. Two of these guys, of course, they've got their cowboy, they've got their Stetson hats on, they're wearing Texas. Oh, God. And you think, for goodness sake, amateur night of the movies. Now, it was 1963, right? The world was different then. We accept all that. But even so, I mean, it does not. The Dallas Police Department do not come out well from that thing, let me tell you.
No, that's for sure. I thought it was interesting that certainly the way the deep dive team looked at it from their perspective, his saying, "You son of a bitch," just before he shot Oswald, allegedly, that tended to show that there was some sanity there, that he wasn't just an impulsive thing, that it was a deliberate act and all the rest of it, and that helped.
I think he wanted to be the knight in shining armour. He wanted to be the vehicle of vengeance. And you can see this in a man like that who was desperate for some kind of validation, desperate for status.
You all know me. I'm Jack Ruby.
I'm Jack Ruby. You all know me. I'm Jack Ruby. I'm somebody. I'm a big guy. Look what I've done. I've avenged. And the beautiful Jackie Kennedy will not have to go through a trial now. I'll protect her from this because I'm a knight in shining armour, etc., etc., etc. You can see the mindset of it.
He died a few years after that, didn't he?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's another thing because, if you read a lot of the conspiracies, they say that Jack Ruby mysteriously died a short time later. In other words, it's all part of the conspiracy. That's not true. He was in prison for years before he died of cancer. So none of that added up. But when you look at the whole thing, and as I say, if you want to see a good example of how not to provide a security packet, then have a look at that. Dear.
Prisoner escort duty, eh?
Well, that's right. But of course, you see, the Dallas Police Department, they wanted to show off their prize, having had this terrible thing happen on their patch, and all sorts of questions asked about, what they could have done. Because the book depository overlooked the whole thing was just a disaster, I think, really. But having done that, they said, well, here we've caught him. And not only have we caught him, we'll show him to you, and we'll bring him out and we'll parade him publicly And
Yeah.
of course,
A firing squad. What was
oh,
that about the book depository, Tom? What was that you alluded to?
the book depository was where Lee Harvey Oswald fired from. That was his firing point. Look, if they'd got the local beat man to do that route and said, where are the likely vulnerable points? Remember that there had been threats made against Kennedy, and he was in an open car.
Yeah.
He was in an open car. You
Have you
know,
been there, Tom? Have you been
no,
to
no,
Dallas?
no, I've never been to Dallas, but I've seen it. I've read about it, and I read the Warren Commission report, and I read the excellent book written by William Manchester called "Death of a President," which was a super book, a very, very well written book about the whole scenario. But when I was in America, I was privileged because I listened to one of the people who was actually on the original investigation talking about the assassination. And he actually had Oswald's rifle there. The rifle is in the FBI museum at Washington, and he actually had the rifle with him. Mannlicher Carcano 6.5 rifle that Oswald had bought through mail orders. There was no question about it. No question. It was his rifle, etc., etc. And it was actually pictured. There was actually photographs taken of Oswald proudly with this rifle. But I'd recommend it. Don't be deceived by all the stuff you get on the internet about the Kennedy assassination. There are two things you should read. You should read the Warren Commission report, which was the official report into it, and you should read Death of a President by William Manchester. Excellent books.
This is you back to this evidence and facts and all these boring things that spoil true crime for everyone.
Yeah, the clue, Simon, is in true crime. True.
Tom, there's a couple of things I wanted to. I think it was remiss of us when we were talking about knife crime and whatnot, not to mention the great work that the Violence Reduction Unit in Scotland has done over the past 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And I had a guest lined up from the head of the Violence Reduction Unit before I went on holiday. So it's something I'm hoping to resurrect and get a wee interview with him this year at some point. But they've done a fantastic job, haven't they?
Yes, and of course, I mean, all down to I think the person who bears a lot of credit from that is John Carnahan, your ex-colleague, and who I joined with John, and knew John very well. We were sort of contemporaries throughout, and I think he really did break the mold. He went to Willie Ray, who was your chief, who again, credit.
Yeah,
He said, yes, this is different, but we're going to invest in it. He got partners involved, and they took it forward. And a tremendous credit, and it's a very, very important piece of work. And I think there are still lessons to be learned from it. What we've got to be careful of is that we don't leave it behind, because somebody once said to me, and I thought it was very true, that Scotland was a scrapyard of good ideas. Because we discover them, we develop them, and we operate them, but then we lose interest and we lose funding, and something else comes along to replace it, and round goes the wheel, and it's another 10 years before we come back and rediscover it again. A scrapyard of good ideas, and I thought that was very, very apt. And of course, that's particularly true in drug policy, Simon. Particularly true in drug policy.
It's just what I was going to say, Tom, is I think what you're saying there, a lot of the principles of the Violence Reduction Unit could be directly applied to the drugs problem that we have and the black markets that we have.
Yes, of course they could. Of course they could, yeah.
But that's for another day.
Indeed.
The big question today is, for you, and I don't have a quiz book or anything, it's an easy one, hopefully it's good news. Have you pressed the big button, the big red button to print your new book yet?
Yes, the book has gone to the printers as of Friday, and I just got an email actually yesterday saying that they had received it and downloaded it, and so I would expect that in the coming week the presses will be churning. Well, I don't think they do churn now. I think it's all done by computers, but you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. Tom, you need to get us the blurb from the back of the book and get it up onto our website. I don't think we've done that yet.
Yep, I can send you a cover of it. And not just that, Simon, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. When you're convalescing, in your wheelchair going about, I'll bring you a signed copy. There you go.
You'll bring me it?
Yeah, I'll have to. You'll be immobile.
I'm spoiled.
I'll bring you a signed copy and see if you get any grapes or sweeties that I can steal at the same time.
I knew there'd be an ulterior motive somewhere.
So you'll not be able to catch me.
Tom, just to recap there, this will be our second last. Next week, we'll be doing a review of the season, which has been quite... I think I was having a wee look at it today before I phoned, and we've got an amazing body of work there that the deep dive team have delved through for us. So it'll be quite a job narrowing that down for the season end review that we normally do. And of course, on that day, we can discuss with the audience and hopefully get some feedback from them as well about what we're going to be doing in season 4 in the not too distant future.
Well, I've had some feedback actually from some people I know that listen to it, so I'll be happy to share that. But my observation is what a range of subjects we've covered. I mean, the deep divers, we've got to say hats off to them. They're having a break just now, and well deserved, because they have brought up some stuff, everything from witch finding to Fatty Arbuckle to 19th century poaching. I mean, wow. Wow. Okay, look, I'm going to stick my neck out here. I don't think there's many, if any, true crime podcasts that cover that range of subjects. I
think you'll be absolutely right for once, Tom.
No, I don't think there will be. I don't think there will be.
Tom, that's been great. Thanks very much for today, and we'll speak soon.
Speak soon, and listen, take care, and good luck with the leg.
I've got another couple of weeks yet. I've still got time to change my mind. I've actually been this far before and thought of all sorts of reasons why I shouldn't get it done.
Oh, so is that right?
Not count our chickens just yet.
Well, I've only got one thing to say to you, Simon. It's this.
Is that the title of your new book? Is that the audio version? Cheers, Tom.
Good night.
Take care.